All right, welcome to the third and final installment of our CIVE course breakdown. We've talked about getting clean water to our taps, but now we're going to tackle the other end of the cycle, treating wastewater so it can be safely returned to the environment. And let me tell you, this is where engineering meets biology in a really fascinating way.
I mean, it's a simple question, right? We all contribute to the wastewater system every single day, but the journey that water takes is this incredibly complex, hidden process. So let's follow that journey, from your drain all the way back to nature.
Okay, so the first thing you really need to grasp is the huge difference between this and our last explainer. Water treatment is mostly a physical and chemical challenge. You know, removing particles and killing pathogens. But wastewater treatment? That's a biological game. We aren't just removing stuff, we are actively managing a massive, living ecosystem of microorganisms.
To really get this, we're just going to follow the flow. We'll start by defining the biological challenge, then walk through the physical first steps, see how we actually harness this army of microbes, then figure out what on earth to do with all the leftover sludge, and finally, look at how this waste can actually become a resource.
So, what makes wastewater such a unique challenge? Well, it all comes down to what's in it. See, it's not just dirty, it's full of organic material, which is basically food for bacteria. And our first job is to figure out just how much food we're dealing with.
And the key metric for that is called Biochemical Oxygen Demand, or BOD. Just think of it like this. The more organic waste in the water, the more food there is for microbes. And as they eat all that food, they consume oxygen. So a high BOD means really polluted water that would literally starve a river of oxygen if we released it. While we're focused on BOD, engineers also use other metrics like COD, chemical oxygen demand, and TOC, total organic carbon, to get the full picture. Our entire goal is to let this happen in a controlled tank, not out in the environment.
The whole treatment process is really a multi-stage assault on this pollution. It starts with the big stuff in preliminary and primary treatment, then it moves to the microscopic level in secondary treatment, and it can even end with an advanced polishing in the tertiary stage. So let's start at the very beginning.
Before we can unleash our army of microbes, we have to clear the way. These first stages are all about using basic physics, screens and gravity, to get rid of the easy stuff. This is the brute force part of the operation.
And the engineering here is actually pretty clever. In the grit chamber, for example, we have to maintain this super precise horizontal velocity, slow enough for heavy stuff like sand to settle out, but fast enough that the lighter organic solids we want to treat stay suspended and move on. After that, primary sedimentation takes over and removes anywhere from 30 to 60% of the suspended solids in just a couple of hours. And if you add some chemicals, you can boost that removal up to 90%.
All right, with all the big stuff gone, we get to the heart of the process, secondary treatment. This is where the real magic happens. We're about to hand the whole problem over to trillions of hungry bacteria. This isn't about killing them, it's about putting them to work.
And this quote really sums up the whole mindset. We are, for all intents and purposes, microbial farmers. We create the perfect conditions for these bacteria to just chow down on all those organic pollutants, that BOD we talked about. The whole goal is to convert that dissolved pollution into more bacteria, which are solid particles we can actually remove, and harmless byproducts like carbon dioxide.
Now, there are two main ways we manage this workforce. In attached growth systems, we basically give the bacteria a home, a surface like rocks or plastic media to grow on, and we just pass the wastewater over them. But in suspended growth systems, like the super common activated sludge process, we keep the bacteria freely floating and mixed within the wastewater in a giant aeration tank.
This brings us to the core engineering puzzle of the whole process. I mean, if your workforce is just floating around in a giant tank, how do you make sure you have enough of them? How do you keep them healthy? And how do you stop them from just flowing right out of the tank? How do you maintain that stable population? Well, the answer is this absolutely brilliant engineering control parameter called the mean cell residence time, or theta C. This has nothing to do with how long the water is in the tank. It's all about the average age of our microbial workforce. It is the single most important lever we can pull to control the entire biological system. So here's the key. We use theta psi to create a perfect equilibrium. We want the rate at which new bacteria are born from eating all that waste to be perfectly balanced by the rate at which we intentionally remove them from the system. This keeps the whole workforce young, hungry, and super efficient. And it also directly tells us how much oxygen we need to pump in, which is a massive energy cost for any plant. Of course, when you're managing a living system, things can definitely go wrong.
If that sludge age, theta C, gets too high, you might get floating sludge, where different bacteria start producing nitrogen gas that makes the solids float instead of sink. Or you could get bulking sludge, where these long, stringy organisms take over and just refuse to settle. It's a constant biological balancing act for the plant operators.
So, we've used our microbes to clean the water. That's great. But in the process, we've created a massive new problem. All that organic matter and all those new bacteria have settled out as this watery solid we call sludge. And there is a lot of it.
Now, we have to deal with this sludge, and the scale of the problem is defined by one pretty shocking number, up to 98%. Now, 98% of what? It's probably not what you think.
That 98% is water. The sludge is mostly just water with solids trapped inside it. So the biggest, most expensive challenge in sludge management isn't treating the solids, it's getting rid of the enormous volume of water to turn it into something we can actually handle.
And this process is another multi-stage journey. First, we thicken it to get some of the free water out. Then, we send it to digestion to stabilize it. And finally, we dewater it, using machines like centrifuges or even old-school sand beds to squeeze out that last bit of water.
And during that digestion step, we have another big biological choice to make. We can use anaerobic digestion, which works without oxygen. It's a complex process, but it produces valuable biogas that can actually help power the plant. The downside is it's really sensitive. Or we can use aerobic digestion, which is way simpler and more stable, but it consumes a huge amount of energy and produces no methane. It's this critical trade-off between energy production and operational simplicity.
So after all that thickening, digesting, and dewatering, we're finally left with a product called biosolids. We've successfully closed the loop. But where does this stuff actually go?
Well, there are three main paths. It can be treated to a point where it's safe to use as a nutrient-rich fertilizer on farmland. Or it can be disposed of in a landfill, and the third option is incineration, which drastically reduces its volume and can even be used to generate some energy.
So there you have it. We have tracked our flush from a problem into a solution. We've seen how engineers act as microbial farmers, managing this incredibly complex living system to protect public health and the environment, turning a liability into clean water and a stable, manageable solid.
And this really brings us to the final, most important question for the future of this whole field. We're starting to see wastewater not as a disposal problem, but as a recovery opportunity for water, for nutrients, and for energy. Understanding these processes is absolutely essential for your career in civil engineering. Good luck with your studies.